The pounding of hooves rattled the windowpanes as Callum Davenport guided the orc woman down the narrow ladder into his root cellar, her hand trembling in his, despite the warrior's build beneath her torn traveling cloak. She was tall but willowy, her green skin smudged with dust and blood, her small tusks barely visible as she pressed her lips together to keep from making a sound. Above them, torches flickered past the window and voices rang out in the orcish tongue, harsh and searching. "Stay quiet," Callum whispered, his voice steady despite the hammering of his own heart. "I will handle this." Her amber eyes met his, wide with fear but holding something else too, a fierce pride that refused to break even now. She nodded once, quick and sharp, and descended into the darkness. Callum lowered the trapdoor and kicked the woven rug back into place, then moved to his hearth and stirred the embers as if he had been sitting there all evening. The warmth of the fire barely touched the chill that had settled into his bones. They came to his door moments later. 3 orcs, mounted and armed, their armor still bearing the dust of hard riding. The leader dismounted with a heavy thud and hammered his fist against the oak planks. Callum opened the door and held his lantern high, letting the light fall across his face so they could see he was unarmed and unafraid. "Evening," he said, his tone casual but not dismissive. "Something I can help you with." The lead orc was older, his skin a darker shade of green, his tusks yellowed with age. His eyes swept over Callum with the cold assessment of a hunter. "We track a trader," he said in accented but clear common. "Female. Young, she passed this way." "I have seen no one," Callum replied, meeting the orc's gaze without flinching. "Been working my field since dawn. Just sat down to supper." The orc studied him for a long moment, then gestured to his companions. One of them dismounted and pushed past Callum into the house. Callum stepped aside, his jaw tight but his hands loose at his sides. The orc moved through the main room, overturning a chair, kicking at the rug. His boot struck the edge of the trapdoor with a dull thud, but the rug muffled it, and he moved on without pausing. "Nothing here," the orc called back in his own language. The leader grunted. "If you see her," he said to Callum, "you report. She is enemy of the clan. Sheltering her is death sentence for you." "Understood," Callum said evenly. "But like I said, I have seen no one." The orc held his gaze a moment longer, then turned and swung himself back into his saddle. The 3 riders vanished into the night, their torches bobbing away down the valley road like angry fireflies. Callum stood in his doorway until the sound of hooves faded entirely, then closed and barred the door. He waited another 10 minutes, listening, before he moved the rug aside and lifted the trapdoor. She was crouched at the base of the ladder, a knife in her hand, her breathing shallow and fast. When she saw him, the knife lowered, but her grip on it did not loosen. "They are gone," Callum said quietly. "Come up. You will freeze down there." She hesitated, then climbed the ladder with surprising grace despite her evident exhaustion. In the firelight, he could see her more clearly now. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 20 or 21, with high cheekbones and dark hair pulled back in a braid that had come half undone. Her clothing was travel-worn but well-made, a warrior's leathers that had seen real use. Blood streaked her left arm, though whether it was hers or someone else's, he could not tell. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair by the fire. "Let me see that arm." She looked at him warily, then at the door, then back at him. Finally she sat, though her posture remained tense, ready to bolt. Callum fetched water and clean cloth from his kitchen and knelt beside her. She watched him with those amber eyes as he gently pushed back her sleeve. The wound was shallow, a graze from a blade, but it needed cleaning. He worked carefully, aware of her scrutiny, aware of the knife still resting within her reach on the arm of the chair. "My name is Callum," he said as he worked. "Callum Davenport. This is my land, about 40 acres, mostly wheat and barley. Been here 5 years." She said nothing, but he felt some of the tension ease from her arm. "You do not have to tell me your name if you do not want to," he continued. "But you are safe here, I give you my word." For a long moment she was silent. Then, in a voice roughened by thirst and fear, she said, "Cyra." "Cyra Grimwood." "Cyra," he repeated, testing the name. "Well, Cyra, you are welcome to stay as long as you need. There is a bed in the loft, and I will take the chair down here. In the morning we can figure out what comes next." She shook her head sharply. "They called me traitor," she said, her voice low and fierce. "They will not stop looking. If they find me here, they will kill you." "Then we will make sure they do not find you here," Callum said simply. He tied off the bandage and sat back on his heels. "You are not the first person to need shelter on this border, and I doubt you will be the last. I chose to live out here because I believe a man should be able to offer help when it is needed, without asking too many questions." Cyra stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign tongue. "You do not even know why they hunt me," she said. "I could be a murderer, a thief." "Are you?" "No," she said fiercely. "But you do not know that." Callum met her gaze and allowed himself a small smile. "I am a pretty good judge of character," he said. "And I do not think a murderer would have warned me about the danger I am in by helping her." She looked away, her jaw working. For a moment he thought she might argue further, but then her shoulders sagged, and she let out a long, shaky breath. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I have nowhere else to go." "Then you are home," Callum said. The words came out more gently than he had intended, and he saw her eyes flick back to him, startled. He cleared his throat and stood. "Let me get you something to eat. You look half-starved." He busied himself at the hearth, ladling stew from the pot that hung over the fire. It was simple fare, venison and root vegetables, but it was hot and filling. He handed her a bowl and a chunk of bread, and she ate with the focused intensity of someone who had not had a real meal in days. While she ate, Callum banked the fire and checked the shutters, making sure they were latched tight. His mind was already turning over the problem. The riders would be back, or others like them. He needed to know more about what was happening, why Cyra was being hunted, and whether there was any way to resolve it that did not end with one or both of them dead. But those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight, she needed rest, and he needed to think. When she finished eating, he showed her to the loft. It was a small space, tucked under the eaves, but it had a proper bed with quilts his mother had made before she passed. Cyra looked at it as if it were a treasure. "I will be downstairs," Callum said. "If you need anything, just call." She turned to him, and for the first time he saw something other than fear or suspicion in her eyes. It was gratitude, raw and unguarded. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Callum considered the question. He could have given her a dozen answers, all of them true. Because it was the right thing to do. Because he had seen too much cruelty in his years as a soldier, and he was tired of it. Because he had chosen this lonely border life precisely so he could be the kind of man who helped, rather than the kind who looked away. But what he said was simply, "Because you needed help, and I could give it." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Good night, Callum Davenport," she said. "Good night, Cyra Grimwood." He descended the ladder and settled into his chair by the fire, a blanket over his knees and his old sword within reach. Sleep did not come easily. He listened to the sounds of the night, the creak of the house, the rustle of the wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl. And he thought about the woman in his loft, the fear in her eyes, and the way she had said thank you as if the words were a precious gift she could not afford to give lightly. By the time dawn light began to creep through the shutters, Callum had made his decision. Whatever this was, Whatever trouble Cyra had brought to his door, he would see it through. He was not a man who did things by halves, and he was not a man who turned away from someone in need, even if it cost him everything. Cyra woke to the smell of frying bacon and the low murmur of a man's voice singing off-key. For a moment, she did not remember where she was, and her hand shot to the knife she had tucked under the pillow. Then memory returned, the flight through the darkness, the riders, the human who had hidden her in his cellar and then fed her and given her his bed. She sat up slowly, her body aching from days of hard travel and too little sleep. Through the small window in the loft, she could see fields stretching away under a pale morning sky, the grain rippling in the breeze like water. It was beautiful, in a quiet way that made her chest tighten. She descended the ladder and found Callum at the hearth, turning bacon in a skillet. He looked up and smiled, a warm, uncomplicated expression that made her feel oddly off balance. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept well." "I did," she admitted. "Better than I have in weeks." He nodded and gestured to the table. "Sit. Breakfast is almost ready." She sat, watching him move around the small kitchen with easy confidence. He was not a large man, perhaps just shy of 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from years of physical labor. His hair was brown and sun-streaked, his hands scarred and calloused. There was a steadiness to him, a calm that seemed to fill the room. He set a plate in front of her, bacon and eggs and fresh bread with butter, and poured her a cup of cider. Then he sat across from her with his own plate and began to eat. For a while, they ate in silence. Cyra found herself sneaking glances at him, trying to understand this man who had risked his life for a stranger. In her clan, such kindness was rare, especially across the divide of species. Humans were the enemy, or at best, a necessary nuisance to be tolerated for trade. Yet here was one who had hidden her from her own people without hesitation. "Can I ask you something?" Callum said finally, breaking the silence. She tensed but nodded. "You do not have to answer if you do not want to," he continued, "but I would like to know what you are running from. Not because I doubt you, but because I need to understand what we are dealing with. If there is a way to make this right, I would like to help." Cyra set down her fork and stared at the table. The words came hard, like pulling splinters from a wound. "My clan has fractured," she said. "There are those who believe we should raid the human settlements, take what we need by force. And there are those who believe we should honor the old treaties, trade fairly, and live in peace." She paused, her jaw tight. "I spoke against the raids. I said we had no right to attack people who had done us no harm. For that I was named traitor." Callum's expression darkened. "They are purging anyone who disagrees with them." "Yes," Cyra said. "The leader, his name is Garrick Ironhide. He is ruthless and ambitious. He convinced the war chief that anyone who opposed the raids was weak, a danger to the clan. So the purge began. I fled because I did not want to fight my own people, but I will not stand aside while they slaughter innocents." Callum leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "So you are not a traitor at all," he said. "You are trying to stop a war." "I am trying to prevent needless bloodshed," Cyra corrected. "But it does not matter what my intentions were. Garrick has named me enemy, and the war chief has given him authority to hunt me down." "Then we need to find a way to get you to someone who can challenge Garrick," Callum said. "There must be others in your clan who oppose this, people with influence." Cyra shook her head. "There are, but they are scattered or in hiding, and even if I could reach them, what could they do?" "Garrick has the war chief's ear." "Then we find a way to change the war chief's mind," Callum said, "or we find a way to undermine Garrick." She looked at him, astonished. "You would help me do that? This is not your fight. You said yourself this is an orc matter." "It became my fight the moment I hid you in my cellar," Callum said quietly. And besides, if Geirk gets his way and the raids begin, it will not be just an orc matter anymore. It will be my neighbors, my friends, maybe even me. So yes, I would help you. Cyra felt something shift inside her, a wall she had not known she was holding up beginning to crack. This man, this human, was offering her not just shelter but alliance. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "Thank you," she said, and this time the words came easier. Callum smiled. "We will figure this out," he said. "But for now, you need to stay out of sight. I will go into the village this afternoon, see if I can learn anything about what is happening. If Geirk's riders are still in the area, I will find out." Cyra nodded, though the thought of him venturing out while she hid made her feel like a coward. Still, she knew he was right. She could not risk being seen. The days that followed fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Callum worked his fields during the day while Cyra stayed inside, keeping away from the windows. In the evenings, they ate together and talked, tentative at first, then with growing ease. She learned that he had been a soldier once, fighting in a border skirmish that had left him disillusioned with war. He had bought this land with his discharge pay and built the house with his own hands, determined to make something good out of the violence he had seen. She told him about her clan, the traditions and the honor codes, the way the Purge had torn families apart. She spoke of her mother, a healer who had died trying to tend to both sides of the conflict, and her father, who had been executed by Geirk for refusing to participate in the raids. "I am sorry," Callum said when she finished, his voice heavy with genuine sorrow. "You have lost so much." "So have you," Cyra said, thinking of the things he had told her about the war, the friends he had buried. "Yet you still find it in yourself to help." "Maybe that is why I help," Callum said. "Because I know what it is like to lose, and I do not want anyone else to go through it if I can stop it." By the end of the first week, Cyra found herself thinking of the house not as a hiding place but as a home. She helped where she could, mending his clothes, tending the hearth, preparing meals. Callum never asked her to, but she could see the gratitude in his eyes when he came in from the fields to find supper waiting. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she said, "This is the first time in months I have felt safe." Callum looked at her, his expression soft. "I am glad," he said. "You deserve to feel safe." She met his gaze and something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. It was not just gratitude she felt for him, nor was it simply friendship. It was something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster and her skin feel too warm. She looked away quickly, unsure what to do with the feeling. The peace shattered 2 weeks later. Callum had gone to the village for supplies, and Cyra was alone in the house when she heard the sound of hooves. She moved to the window and peered out through a crack in the shutters, her heart sinking. 6 riders, all orcs, all armed. And at their head was a figure she recognized even from a distance. Geirk Ironhide himself. Cyra's mind raced. She could hide in the cellar again, but if they searched more thoroughly this time, they would find her. She could run, but they would see her before she made it to the trees. She could fight, but she was 1 against 6, and Geirk was a battle-hardened warrior. She was still weighing her options when the riders reached the house. Geirk dismounted and pounded on the door. "Open," he commanded. "We know you shelter the traitor." Cyra's blood ran cold. Someone had talked, or they had pieced it together from the pattern of sightings. It did not matter. They were here and Callum was not. She moved to the door, her hand on her knife, and made her decision. If they were going to take her, she would not let them destroy Callum's home in the process. She would go willingly, and she would pray that he did not try to stop them. But before she could open the door, she heard another sound. A horse, approaching fast. She looked out the window again and saw Callum riding hard up the path, his face set in grim determination. He reined in his horse between the riders and the house, dismounting in one fluid motion. "This is my land," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "You have no right to be here." Gehrke turned to him, his expression contemptuous. "Step aside, human. This does not concern you." "It concerns me very much," Callum said. "You are on my property, threatening my home. I would say that makes it my concern." Gehrke's hand moved to his sword. "We have reason to believe you are sheltering a traitor to the clan. Surrender her, and we will leave you in peace." "I shelter no one but myself," Callum said evenly, "and I will thank you to leave." Gehrke studied him, then smiled, a cold and humorless expression. "You are brave, human, or foolish. Either way, it does not matter. We will search your home, and if we find her, you will both die." Callum did not move. "You will not enter my home," he said. Gehrke drew his sword. "Then you will die first." Cyra burst through the door before Gehrke could take a step, her own blade in hand. "Enough," she said, her voice ringing out. "I am here, Gehrke. Leave him out of this." Gehrke's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Cyra Grimwood," he said, "you have led us on a fine chase, but it ends now." "It does not have to end in bloodshed," Cyra said, moving to stand beside Callum. "Let me speak to the war chief. Let me make my case." "The war chief has already heard your case," Gehrke said, "and he found you guilty." "Then let the clan council hear it," Cyra said. "You cannot execute me without a proper trial. The old laws demand it." Gehrke's smile faded. She had him, and he knew it. The old laws were sacred, and even Gehrke could not break them openly without risking rebellion. "Very well," he said finally. "You will come with us, and you will stand before the council, but know this: if you run again, there will be no trial, only death." "I will not run," Cyra said. She turned to Callum, her heart breaking at the fear and anger in his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "Wait," Callum said, his voice rough. "I am coming with you." Gehrke laughed. "You, a human at a clan council, ridiculous." "I have something to say," Callum said. "About the raids and about Cyra. And I have the right to speak as a landowner on this border. Your war chief will want to hear what I have to say, even if you do not." Gehrke's expression darkened, but after a moment he nodded curtly. "Fine. You will both come. But if you speak out of turn, human, I will gut you where you stand." "Understood," Callum said. They rode for 2 days through rough country that Cyra knew well. Gehrke kept them bound and under close guard, but he did not mistreat them. Whatever else he was an orc of honor, at least when it came to the old laws. The clan's main encampment was nestled in a valley between 2 ridges, a sprawling collection of hide tents and wooden structures. Cyra had not been here since before the Purge began, and the sight of it made her chest ache with longing and grief. The council met in the war chief's hall, a long structure with a fire pit running down the center. The war chief, an old orc named Thulgrim Stonefist, sat at the head of the hall, flanked by the clan elders. Gehrke stood to one side, his face smug. Cyra and Callum were brought before the council in chains. Thulgrim regarded them with weary eyes. "Cyra Grimwood," he said. "You are accused of treason against the clan. How do you answer?" "I am no traitor," Cyra said, her voice strong. "I oppose the raids because they violate the old treaties and endanger the clan. That is not treason. That is loyalty." Gehrke stepped forward. "She undermined the will of the war chief," he said. "She spread dissent and encouraged others to defy your command. That is treason." "I encouraged others to think for themselves," Cyra said. "To consider the consequences of our actions. Is that a crime?" Thulgrim frowned. "The raids were ordered to secure resources for the clan," he said. "We cannot survive on trade alone." "With respect, war chief," Callum said, and every eye in the hall turned to him. "You can. I know the border settlements and I know the people. They are willing to trade fairly, but they will not tolerate raids. If you attack them, you will start a war you cannot win. Gehrk sneered. And why should we trust the word of a human? Because I have no reason to lie, Callum said. I stand to gain nothing from this, except the chance to prevent bloodshed on both sides. I have lived on this border for 5 years. I have traded with orcs and humans alike. I know that peace is possible, but only if both sides are willing to honor the old agreements. One of the elders, a woman with silver hair and deep scars across her face, leaned forward. You speak well, human, she said. But words are wind. What proof do you offer that the settlements will trade fairly? I offer myself, Callum said. Let me broker a new agreement. I will speak to the settlers, and I will bring their leaders to meet with yours. We can establish new trade routes, new terms that benefit both sides, but only if you call off the raids. Thulgrim studied him for a long moment, then looked at Cyra. And you, Cyra Grimwood. If I grant you your life, what will you do? I will help him, Cyra said. I will stand as witness to the agreement, and I will work to rebuild the trust that has been broken. Gehrk slammed his fist on the table. This is madness, he said. You would take the word of a human and a traitor over the strength of the clan. I would take the word of those who seek peace over those who seek only war, Thulgrim said, his voice heavy. He stood, and the hall fell silent. The purge is ended, he said. Cyra Grimwood is cleared of all charges. And you, Gehrk Ironhide, are stripped of your rank for exceeding your authority and sowing division within the clan. Gehrk's face twisted with rage, but he said nothing. He knew better than to challenge the war chief openly. As for the raids, Thulgrim continued, they are suspended. This human, Callum Davenport, will have 1 season to broker a new agreement. If he succeeds, we will honor it. If he fails, we will revisit the matter. Callum bowed his head. Thank you, war chief. I will not fail. The chains were removed, and Cyra and Callum were led out of the hall. Outside, in the cool evening air, Cyra turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You saved my life, she said. You saved mine first, Callum said. By trusting me. She reached out and took his hand, and he squeezed it gently. What happens now? She asked. Now we go home, Callum said, and we start building something better. They returned to Callum's homestead 3 days later, tired but hopeful. The fields were waiting, the house stood quiet and welcoming, and for the first time since the purge began, Cyra felt as if she could breathe. Over the following weeks, Callum kept his promise. He rode to the nearby settlements and spoke with the leaders, laying out the terms of a new agreement. It was hard work, convincing people who had lived in fear of orc raids for generations that peace was possible. But Callum was patient and persuasive, and slowly he began to make progress. Cyra helped where she could, offering her knowledge of the clan and her presence as proof that not all orcs were enemies. Some of the settlers were wary of her, but others welcomed her, grateful for the chance to avoid war. By midsummer, Callum had brokered a new trade agreement. The settlers would provide grain and metalwork in exchange for orc-made tools and leather goods. The terms were fair, and both sides agreed to honor them. When Callum brought the signed agreement to Thulgrim, the war chief nodded his approval. You have done well, human, he said. The clan will honor this. And Cyra, Callum asked, is she free to go where she chooses? Thulgrim looked at Cyra, who stood beside Callum, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She is free, he said. She may return to the clan if she wishes, or she may go her own way. The choice is hers. Cyra met Thulgrim's gaze. I choose to stay with Callum, she said. He gave me a home when I had none. I would like to build a life with him if he will have me. Callum turned to her, his eyes wide. Are you sure? He asked. You would be giving up your clan, your people. I am not giving them up, Cyra said. I am choosing to live between 2 worlds as a bridge. I can still visit the clan, still honor my heritage, but my home is with you." Callum's face broke into a smile, wide and joyous. "Then yes," he said. 1,000 times yes." Thulgrim watched them with something that might have been approval. "Then it is settled," he said. "Go and build your life, and know that the clan will always welcome you, Cyra Grimwood, as one who helped bring peace." They returned to the homestead, and in the days that followed, they began to build in earnest. Callum taught Cyra the rhythms of farming, the planting and the harvest, the care of the land. She taught him the orc ways, the songs and the stories, the old traditions that she had grown up with. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked about the future. They spoke of expanding the farm, of bringing in more crops, of building a larger house that could hold the life they were creating together. One evening, as the first chill of autumn crept into the air, Callum took Cyra's hand and led her outside. The sky was ablaze with stars, and the fields stretched out around them, golden and waiting. "I have something to ask you," Callum said, his voice steady but his eyes nervous. Cyra looked at him, her heart beginning to race. "I know we come from different worlds," Callum said. "I know there will be people who do not understand, who will judge us for what we are. But I do not care about them. I care about you, Cyra. I care about the life we are building together, and I want to make it official." He knelt, and from his pocket, he drew a simple ring, hammered from silver and set with a small green stone. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Will you be my wife and let me be your husband for as long as we both shall live?" Cyra felt tears spill down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Callum, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. They stood there under the stars, holding each other, and Cyra thought that she had never felt so safe, so loved, so completely at home. The wedding took place a month later, in the yard of the homestead. It was a small affair, just a few friends from the settlement and a delegation from the clan, including Thulgrim and the silver-haired elder who had spoken in Cyra's defense. The ceremony blended human and orc traditions, with vows spoken in both common and orcish, and a feast that lasted long into the night. When it was over, and the guests had departed, Callum and Cyra stood together in the field behind the house. In Cyra's hands was a small pouch of seeds, a gift from Thulgrim. They were seeds from the clan's sacred crop, a grain that had been grown by her people for generations. "Plant them here," Thulgrim had said. "Let them grow alongside the human crops. Let them be a symbol of what you are building." Cyra knelt in the soil, Callum beside her, and together they planted the seeds. Row by row, they worked in the fading light, their hands moving in rhythm, their breaths mingling in the cool air. When the last seed was planted, Cyra sat back on her heels and looked at the field. It was bare now, but she could see it in her mind's eye, the green shoots rising in the spring, the two crops growing side by side, roots tangled together beneath the earth. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is a beginning," Callum said, his hand finding hers. She turned to him, her heart full. "It is a home," she said. "Our home." He smiled and pulled her close, and as the stars came out above them, they sat together in the field they had planted, two people from two worlds, building something new. The winter that followed was hard but not unbearable. Callum and Cyra worked side by side, weathering the storms and the cold, tending to the animals and keeping the house warm. They grew closer with each passing day, learning the small rhythms of each other's lives, the habits and the quirks that made them who they were. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and planned for the spring. They talked about expanding the farm, about bringing in sheep or goats, about building a larger barn. They talked about the settlement and the clan, about the fragile peace they had helped to create, and the work that still needed to be done to maintain it. And sometimes, late at night, they talked about the future in more personal terms. About the family they might have one day, about the children who would grow up knowing both worlds, human and orc, and who would carry forward the legacy of peace that they were building. Spring came early that year, and with it, the first green shoots of the sacred grain. Cyra watched them rise from the soil with a joy that was almost painful in its intensity. It was proof, she thought, that what they were doing was possible. That two worlds could grow together, roots intertwined, stronger for their connection. As the weeks passed, the crops flourished. The wheat and barley and the sacred grain all grew tall and strong, and Callum and Cyra tended them with care. Visitors came, human and orc alike, drawn by the story of the couple who had helped broker peace. Some came with suspicion, but most came with curiosity, and many left with hope. By midsummer, the fields were a sea of green and gold, and Cyra knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that they had succeeded, not just in brokering peace, but in building something real and lasting. A home, a life, a future. One warm evening in late summer, as they walked through the fields together, Cyra felt a flutter in her belly. She stopped, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach, and Callum turned to her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "I think I am with child," she said. Callum stared at her for a moment, and then his face broke into a grin so wide it seemed to split his face in two. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure, unfiltered joy. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are," Cyra said, laughing and crying at the same time. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Cyra said. The months that followed were a blur of preparation and anticipation. Callum built a cradle from oak wood, carving it with intricate patterns that blended human and orc designs. Cyra sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her hands moving with a tenderness she had not known she possessed. The settlement and the clan rallied around them, offering gifts and advice and support. The peace they had brokered was holding, and the success of their farm had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict. When the first snows began to fall, Cyra's time came. The birth was long and difficult, but Callum was there beside her every moment, his hand in hers, his voice steady and reassuring. And when at last the baby came, a strong, healthy girl with green skin and her father's brown eyes, Cyra wept with relief and joy. They named her Talia, a name that meant dew from heaven in the old orcish tongue. She was perfect, a tiny, squalling bundle of life that seemed to contain all the hope and promise of the world. As Cyra held her daughter in her arms, Callum beside her, she looked around the room. The fire crackled in the hearth, the wind howled outside, and the house that had once been just a shelter was now filled with warmth and light and love. "Welcome home, Talia," Cyra whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. Callum leaned in and kissed Cyra's temple, his arm around her shoulders. "Our home," he said softly, and it was. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, disputes between the settlement and the clan, moments when the fragile peace seemed ready to shatter. But Callum and Cyra faced each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each passing season. Talia grew into a bright, curious child, beloved by both human and orc communities. She learned to speak both common and orcish, to honor both her father's and her mother's traditions. And as she grew, so did the farm, expanding and prospering, a testament to the power of cooperation and love. Other families followed their example, human and orc couples who chose to build lives together, to bridge the divide. The settlement and the clan grew closer, trading not just goods but knowledge and friendship, until the border between them seemed less like a line and more like a meeting place. When Talia was 3, Cyra gave birth to a son. They named him Torin, and he was as strong and stubborn as his sister was quick and clever. The house rang with laughter and the sounds of children playing, and Callum and Cyra watched their family grow with hearts full of gratitude. One evening, when Talia was 5 and Torin was 2, the family sat together in the field behind the house. The sacred grain and the wheat and barley grew side by side, just as they had from the beginning, their roots tangled deep beneath the earth. "Tell us the story again, Mama," Talia said, her small hand tugging on Cyra's sleeve. Cyra smiled. "Which story, little one?" "The story of how you and Papa met," Talia said, "and how you came to live here." Cyra glanced at Callum, who nodded encouragingly. So she began, her voice soft and steady, telling the story of the night the riders came, of the cellar and the fear, of the man who had offered her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. She told them about the purge and the trial, about the work of building peace, about the decision to plant the sacred grain alongside the human crops. And she told them about the moment, under the stars, when she had realized that this place, this man, this life, was her home. When she finished, Talia was quiet for a moment, her young face thoughtful. Then she said, "So we are special because we are both human and orc." "You are special because you are you," Callum said, ruffling her hair. "And because you come from 2 worlds that chose to come together." Torin, who had been listening with the solemn intensity of a toddler, looked up at Cyra. "Home," he said, his voice firm. Cyra laughed and pulled him into her lap. "Yes, my love," she said. "This is our home." As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the family sat together in the field. The crops swayed gently in the breeze, the house stood warm and welcoming behind them, and the world stretched out around them, full of possibility. It was a home built on courage and kindness, on the willingness to see beyond difference, to choose love over fear. It was a home that had been hard-won, forged in the crucible of conflict and tempered by the steady work of building peace. And it was a home that would endure, Cyra thought, as long as there were people willing to plant seeds and tend them, to bridge divides and build together. She looked at Callum, and he looked back at her, and in his eyes she saw the same certainty, the same deep, abiding love. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked. "For giving me a home," she said. "For seeing me not as a traitor or an enemy but as someone worth saving." Callum shook his head. "You saved yourself," he said. "I just held the door open." She smiled and leaned into him, and together they watched the sun sink below the horizon, their children playing at their feet, their home stretching out around them, a testament to the power of hope and the enduring strength of love. The seasons turned, and the farm continued to thrive. News of Callum and Cyra's success spread far beyond the border, and others began to see that peace was not just a dream but a reality that could be built, one seed, one friendship, one family at a time. Thulgrim visited often, bringing gifts and news from the clan. He watched Talia and Torin with the fond eye of a grandfather, and he never failed to tell Cyra how proud he was of what she had accomplished. "You have done more for the clan than any warrior," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. "You have shown us that strength is not just in the blade but in the heart." Cyra felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I only did what I thought was right," she said. "And that is why you are a hero," Thulgrim said. The settlers, too, came to see Callum and Cyra as leaders, people who had risked everything to build a better future. They sought their advice on disputes, on trade agreements, on how to navigate the delicate balance of peace. Callum and Cyra welcomed them all, offering what help they could, always mindful that the peace they had built was fragile and required constant tending. But for all the work and the challenges, there were also moments of simple, uncomplicated joy. Evenings spent by the fire, the children's laughter ringing through the house, mornings in the fields with the sun on their faces and the soil beneath their hands. It was a good life, Cyra thought, a life worth fighting for. One autumn evening, when the harvest was in and the first frost had touched the fields, Callum and Cyra stood together at the edge of their land, looking out over the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air was crisp and clean. "Do you ever regret it?" Callum asked quietly. Cyra turned to him, surprised. "Regret what?" "Leaving your clan," he said. "Choosing this life." She considered the question, turning it over in her mind. There were things she missed, certainly. The songs of her people, the rhythm of clan life, the familiarity of the world she had grown up in. But regret? "No, I do not regret it," she said. "Not for a moment. This is where I belong." Callum smiled, and the tension left his shoulders. "I am glad," he said, "because I cannot imagine my life without you." "Nor I without you," Cyra said. He took her hand, and they stood together in the fading light, two people from two worlds, united by love and by the life they had built together. Behind them, the house stood warm and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, Talia and Torin played by the fire, their laughter bright and uncomplicated. And in the field, the sacred grain and the human crop stood side by side, their roots tangled deep beneath the earth, a symbol of what was possible when people chose to build together rather than tear apart. As the stars began to come out, Cyra leaned her head against Callum's shoulder and let herself feel the full weight of her gratitude. For this man, who had seen her not as a monster or an enemy, but as a person in need of help. For this home, which had become a sanctuary and a symbol. For this life, which had been hard-won but was more precious for it. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," Callum said. And as the night settled around them, they stood together in the place they had built, the place they had chosen, the place that was and would always be their home. Time moved forward as it always does, marking the passage of days into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The homestead grew and changed with the seasons, but the foundation that Callum and Cyra had laid remained strong. Their children grew tall and healthy, Talia with her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's steady patience, Torin with his mother's fierce determination and his father's warm heart. The farm prospered beyond what Callum had ever imagined in those early days when he had first broken ground on this land. The fields yielded rich harvests year after year, and the blend of human and orc farming techniques proved more productive than either method alone. Other farmers, both human and orc, came to learn from them, and slowly, the valley transformed into a place where cooperation was the norm rather than the exception. Garrick Ironhide had disappeared after his disgrace, vanishing into the wilderness beyond the clan's territory. Some said he had died, others that he had joined a band of outcasts in the far mountains. Cyra did not know, and she found that she did not much care. He had been a threat once, but that time had passed, and she had more important things to focus on. The trade routes that Callum had established expanded and formalized. A council was formed, with representatives from both the settlements and the clan, to oversee disputes and maintain the agreements. Callum was offered a seat on the council, which he accepted, and Cyra often accompanied him to the meetings, her presence a reminder of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear. There were still those who opposed the peace, of course. Some humans who believed that orcs could never be trusted. some orcs who saw cooperation with humans as weakness. But they were a minority, their voices growing fainter with each passing year as the benefits of peace became undeniable. One spring, when Talia was 8 and Torin was 5, a delegation arrived at the homestead from a distant human kingdom. They had heard of the peace on the border and wanted to learn how it had been achieved, hoping to apply similar principles to their own conflicts with orc clans in their region. Callum and Cyra welcomed them, sharing their story and offering what advice they could. The delegation stayed for a week, observing the farm, attending council meetings, and speaking with both human and orc families in the area. On the final evening of their visit, the leader of the delegation, a nobleman with graying hair and tired eyes, sat with Callum and Cyra by the fire. "What you have built here is remarkable," he said. "But I must ask, how did you do it? How did you convince people to set aside generations of mistrust and hatred?" Callum and Cyra exchanged a glance. Then Callum said, "We did not convince them of anything. We simply showed them that it was possible. We lived our lives, we built our home, and we let the results speak for themselves." "But there must have been resistance," the nobleman pressed. "Surely not everyone was willing to accept this so easily." "There was resistance," Cyra said, "and there still is in some quarters. But we found that most people, when given the choice between peace and war, will choose peace if they believe it can work. Our job was not to force them, but to give them hope that it could." The nobleman nodded slowly. "Hope," he said. "Yes, I suppose that is what is missing in our land. People have forgotten how to hope." "Then remind them," Callum said. "Start small with one family, one agreement, one act of kindness. Peace is not built in grand gestures, but in small, daily choices." When the delegation left the next morning, the nobleman clasped Callum's hand and then, to Cyra's surprise, bowed deeply to her. "You have given us much to think about," he said, "and you have given us something even more valuable, hope." As they watched the delegation ride away, Cyra felt a sense of satisfaction settle over her. They had started this journey alone, she and Callum, two people trying to survive and build a life. But it had grown into something far larger, a movement that was spreading beyond their small valley, touching lives they would never meet. "You think they will succeed?" she asked Callum. "I do not know," Callum said honestly, "but I think they will try, and that is what matters." That summer, Cyra discovered she was pregnant again. The news filled the household with excitement, and Talia and Torin could barely contain their eagerness to meet their new sibling. Callum fussed over Cyra even more than he had during her previous pregnancies, insisting she rest and take it easy, much to her amusement. "I am not fragile," she told him one evening as he tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of vegetables. "I've given birth twice before, and I managed just fine." "I know," Callum said, taking the basket from her anyway, "but humor me, I like taking care of you." She shook her head, but she was smiling. "You are impossible," she said, "and you love me for it," he replied. "I do," she admitted. The baby arrived in late winter, a healthy girl with green skin and her father's brown hair. They named her Fenna, and from the moment she opened her eyes, it was clear she had inherited her mother's fierce spirit. With 3 children now filling the house with noise and energy, Callum and Cyra's lives became even busier, but they would not have traded it for anything. Every evening, as they sat by the fire with their children around them, they felt the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. Talia showed an early aptitude for diplomacy, often mediating disputes between her siblings with a wisdom beyond her years. Callum joked that she would one day take his place on the council, and Cyra suspected he might be right. Torin was more interested in the physical world, spending hours helping his father in the fields or tinkering with tools in the barn. He had a natural understanding of how things worked, and Callum nurtured that curiosity, teaching him everything he knew about farming and building. Fenna was still too young to show clear interests, but she was already displaying a stubborn independence that suggested she would forge her own path when the time came. As the years continued to pass, Callum and Cyra watched with pride as their children grew and the community around them flourished. The valley that had once been a place of tension and fear had become a beacon of hope, a living example of what could be achieved when people chose to work together. Thulgrim grew old and eventually passed the mantle of war chief to a younger orc, a woman named Cara Ironbark who had been one of Cyra's strongest allies during the Purge. Cara continued Thulgrim's policies of peace and cooperation, and under her leadership, the clan prospered as never before. The settlements, too, grew and thrived. New families arrived, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity in a place where human and orc lived side by side in harmony. The valley became known throughout the region as a place of peace, and travelers often stopped to see for themselves the community that had achieved the impossible through it all. Callum and Cyra remained at the heart of it, not as rulers or leaders, but as examples. They continued to work their farm, to raise their children, to live their lives with quiet dignity and unwavering commitment to the principles that had guided them from the beginning. One autumn evening when Talia was 15, Torin was 12, and Fenna was 7, the family gathered in the field behind the house for the harvest. It had become a tradition over the years, all of them working together to bring in the crops, human and orc neighbors joining them to share in the labor and the celebration that followed. As the sun set and the last sheaves were gathered, Callum stood on a slight rise and looked out over the field. Cyra came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Callum said. "About the night I hid you in the cellar and how scared we both were. And I am thinking about how none of this would have been possible if you had not trusted me. Or if you had not been worthy of that trust," Cyra said. "We built this together, Callum, every step of the way." He turned to her, and in the fading light she saw the love in his eyes, as strong and steady as it had been on the day they married. "I would not change a single moment," he said. "Nor would I," Cyra said. Behind them, their children laughed and played with the other young people of the valley, human and orc together. Friendships forged in the innocence of youth, unburdened by the prejudices of the past. Callum pulled Cyra close, and they stood together as the stars began to emerge, watching the community they had helped to build, the home they had created, the legacy they were leaving for their children and for all the generations to come. It was not a perfect world. There were still challenges, still moments of tension and conflict. But it was a world where peace was possible, where differences could be bridged, where love could triumph over fear. And standing there in the field, surrounded by the people they loved, Callum and Cyra knew that they had succeeded in the most important task of all. They had built a home, not just for themselves, but for everyone who believed that a better future was possible. As the night deepened, and the celebration moved to the barn, where tables had been set up and food laid out, Cyra looked around at the faces gathered there. Human and orc, old and young, all of them bound together by the simple act of choosing to see each other as people rather than enemies. She thought about the girl she had been, fleeing through the darkness with death at her heels, and the woman she had become, strong and confident and surrounded by love. She thought about the man who had opened his door to a stranger in need, and the life they had built together from that single act of kindness. And she thought about the future, about her children and their children, about the world that was still being shaped by the choices people made every day. It was a good world, she thought. Not a perfect one, but a good one. A world worth fighting for, worth building, worth protecting. Callum appeared at her side, a cup of cider in each hand. He handed one to her and raised his own. "To home," he said. "To home," Cyra echoed, and they drank together as the laughter and music swirled around them. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Callum and Cyra walked out into the field one last time. The moon was full, casting silver light across the grain, and the air was cool and sweet with the scent of harvest. "You remember the first time we stood here?" Callum asked. "The night we planted the sacred grain." "I remember," Cyra said. "I remember thinking that it was a symbol of hope, a promise of what we could build together." "And now?" Callum asked. "Now it is more than a symbol," Cyra said. "It is a reality. This field, this farm, this community, they are all proof that hope is not just a dream, but something we can create with our own hands." Callum nodded, and they stood in silence for a moment, taking in the beauty of the night, the peace of the land, the quiet contentment of a life well lived. "I love you," Callum said finally. "I love you too," Cyra said. "Always." They turned and walked back to the house, their fingers intertwined, their steps matched. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers and the house was warm and still. They climbed the stairs to their room, and as they lay down together, Cyra felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her, for this man who had saved her life and given her a home. For their children, who were growing up in a world shaped by love and hope. For the community they had built, the peace they had forged, the future they had created. It was everything she had ever wanted, and more than she had ever dreamed possible. As she drifted off to sleep, Callum's arm around her, the sound of his breathing steady and calm beside her, Cyra's last thought was a simple one, a truth that had become the foundation of her life. She was home. Not because of the walls around her or the roof over her head, but because of the man beside her and the life they had built together. A home that had begun with a single act of kindness, grown through years of hard work and dedication, and now stood as a testament to the power of love to overcome any obstacle. And it was a home that would endure, as long as there were people willing to choose hope over fear, love over hatred, and peace over war. That, Cyra thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest gift of all. The years continued their steady march, and with each passing season, the roots of peace grew deeper. Talia came of age and, just as Callum had predicted, took a prominent role in the council, her gift for bridging differences making her invaluable in negotiations between human and orc communities. Torin apprenticed with a master craftsman in the settlement, learning to work metal and wood with skill that soon surpassed his teacher. Fenna showed an interest in healing, studying with both human physicians and orc shamans, blending the knowledge of both traditions into something new and powerful. Callum and Cyra, now in their middle years, stepped back from the day-to-day work of maintaining the peace, content to let the younger generation take up the mantle. But they remained a presence in the community, their home always open, their counsel always available to those who sought it. One spring morning, Talia arrived at the homestead with a young orc man at her side. His name was Dren Stonehammer, and it was clear from the way Talia looked at him that he was more than just a friend. Callum and Cyra welcomed them warmly, and over dinner that evening, Dren asked for their blessing to marry Talia. Callum and Cyra exchanged a glance, seeing in their daughter's eyes the same love and determination that had brought them together all those years ago. "You have our blessing," Callum said, his voice thick with emotion. "And our love." The wedding took place that summer, a grand celebration that brought together families from across the valley and beyond. It was a joyous occasion, filled with laughter and music and dancing, a testament to how far they had all come. As Callum watched his daughter dance with her new husband, Cyra, at his side, he felt a profound sense of completion. The work they had begun had taken root and was now growing beyond them, carried forward by their children and the community they had helped to build. "We did it," he said softly. "We did," Cyra agreed. "And it will continue long after we are gone." Callum turned to her and smiled. "I am glad I will be here to see it, at least for a while longer." "As am I," Cyra said. They stood together, watching the celebration, surrounded by the people they loved, in the place they had made their home. And as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and red, they knew that they had achieved something rare and precious. They had built a legacy of peace, a home that transcended the boundaries of race and prejudice, a future where their children and their children's children could live without fear. It was everything they had fought for, everything they had dreamed of, and more. And as the night descended and the stars came out, Callum and Cyra danced together under the open sky, their hearts full, their spirits light, their love as strong and enduring as the land beneath their feet. This was their home. This was their life. This was their happy ending. And it was perfect,